In a frozen Minneapolis night, a hungry black man gave his only hot meal and coat to a shivering white child on a bench. He thought it was just a small act, a private moment of kindness, until the girl's mother burst into tears and the entire city witnessed what he did next. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. The Minneapolis night fell, bringing a biting cold and heavy snowflakes. The temperature had dropped to -15 degrees Celsius, turning the city into a bleak gray painting where every breath became a white plume of smoke. In that bone-chilling cold, Darius Cole, a black man in his 40s, walked heavily. 3 layers of old worn clothes couldn't hide his shivers from the piercing wind. The food box in his hand, still warm, smelled of beef stew and fresh baked bread, feeling heavy. After hours waiting in the wind and snow, he told himself this one hot meal would be enough to get him through the night. He just needed to get through the night. He looked at the twinkling high-rise lights in the distance, each window glowing brightly. A silent anger simmered. They had everything, while he, even a hot meal, had to pay for it with hours of freezing. A faint, almost inaudible cough pulled Darius from his thoughts. He stopped, his tired but sharp eyes narrowing as he searched. Under the flickering yellow street lamp of a dilapidated bus stop, a small figure huddled on a cold metal bench. His heart twinged. It was a little girl about 5 years old, white, curled up like a fetus. She wore a thin, worn-out sweater with frayed elbows, short jeans revealing her purple-tinged legs, and soaked, snow-covered sneakers. Clearly that was all she had. Her lips were blue, her cheeks flushed from the cold. Around them, a few other homeless people were wrapped tightly in blankets, their backs turned, completely oblivious. Darius took a deep breath, his lips trembling slightly. He shook his head, intending to turn away. He didn't want trouble. He was too exhausted to carry anything more. Every person for themselves, he thought. But then, he looked at Ellie again. The child shivered intermittently, a faint whimper escaping her throat. That image suddenly brought back an old scar in Darius's heart, his younger sister, who had also died from illness in a cold winter, when his family was too poor. He remembered the fragile promise, "I'll always protect you. I'll never let you be cold or hungry." But he hadn't kept that promise. The old pain tore at him. He closed his eyes tightly, shaking his head slightly, as if to ward off the memory. He opened his eyes, a firm decision appearing in his calm but determined gaze. He couldn't leave her. Darius approached. His steps were heavy, but no longer hesitant. He crouched down, facing Ellie. The smell of dampness and cold emanated from him. He lowered his voice, hoarse. Are you okay, child?" Ellie stirred slightly, her large, clear eyes opening. She looked directly at Darius, without any fear, only innocence and trust. Her lips moved, her voice weak. "My mommy went to find food, but you're here. You're a miracle, right?" That word, miracle, pierced Darius. He froze. A strange warmth, like an electric current, ran down his spine, dispelling some of the cold. He felt an unexpected sense of responsibility. Darius took a deep breath, his rough, calloused hands trembling slightly as he took off his thickest jacket, the only one warm enough. He carefully covered Ellie with it, his movements slow, as if afraid of breaking something precious. The warmth from the old jacket seeped into the small body. "Aren't you cold, mister?" Ellie asked, her voice faint. "I'm used to it," Darius replied, his voice hoarse but warm. He sat down next to Ellie, his back to the wind, his thin frame shielding her from the biting cold. He wasn't going to leave as long as she was alone. He looked down at the food box still in his hand, then back at Ellie. A moment of internal struggle. His stomach growled, protesting, but then he held the hot food box out to the little girl. "Take it, eat," he said, his voice husky. Not long after, a figure suddenly emerged from the hazy snow. Rachel Moore, a white, single mother, gaunt-faced, with deep dark circles under her eyes, her hair matted to her face with snow and cold sweat, her hands trembling as she clutched an empty plastic bag. She'd searched every alley, every dumpster, but everything was empty. The harsh winter had left nothing. Her own gnawing hunger was nothing compared to the pain of knowing Ellie was cold and hungry. She saw her daughter sleeping soundly beside a strange man, with the steaming food box resting on the little girl's lap. A jolt of panic, a mother's instinct, shot through her. Her eyes immediately sharpened, filled with caution and raw fear. Her lips moved soundlessly. She rushed forward, like a mother animal protecting her young. Rachel clutched Ellie tightly. She growled, her voice hoarse from cold and anger. What are you doing to my daughter?" She tightened her grip on Ellie, her body rigid, ready to attack. Ellie stirred in her mother's arms. She lifted her head, her large, clear eyes looking at Rachel. Her voice was clear but firm. "Mommy, he kept me warm. He sat with me. No one else did that before. He even gave me food." Rachel looked at Darius's old jacket, still wrapped around Ellie, and the food box nestled in her daughter's arms. Her trembling hand touched the thick, warm fabric, then the food box. The warmth from the box transferred to her hand. Her eyes still held a wary gaze at Darius, but the fiery anger had softened. A pang of shame, then regret, crept in for having suspected him. She took a deep breath, looked at Darius, then at Ellie. She nodded slightly. Rachel reluctantly shifted, keeping her distance from Darius, but her body was less tense. The gray mool light of dawn appeared, filtering through the misty window panes. A small, white truck pulled up. Sarah, a young social worker with her hair neatly bunned and wearing a navy blue uniform jacket, stepped out, holding a clipboard. She walked directly to the bus stop. She bent down to look at Ellie, then at Rachel. "Hello. We have an emergency shelter nearby. Luckily there's one last spot," Sarah said, her voice a little hurried. Sarah checked the list. She read Darius's name. "Darius Cole. You're approved." He heard his name. His head lifted slightly. A spark of hope flickered in his eyes, then vanished. He looked at Ellie. The little girl was coughing, her face pale. Ellie's eyes were tired, but still looked at him with absolute trust. He looked at Rachel, who was holding Ellie tightly, her eyes filled with anxiety and exhaustion. A terrible internal struggle was clear on Darius's face. He yearned for a night without shivering, just one night of true warmth, but Ellie's image haunted him. He told himself, "I at least have a car to sleep in, but they have nothing. They need it more." Darius took a deep breath. He lifted his head, his eyes focused on Sarah. He shook his head, releasing his hand from the clipboard Sarah was holding. Darius looked at Sarah, his gaze firm. "I'll yield." His voice was deep and hoarse, resonating clearly in the cold air. He pointed towards Rachel and Ellie. "She has a small child, and doesn't have enough paperwork for the regular shelter. I have my car to get into. She has nothing." Sarah's mouth dropped open, her eyes wide with surprise. She looked at Darius, then at Rachel and Ellie, then back at Darius. A great respect was evident on her face. Rachel stood frozen, her eyes glazed over. Her tears had dried up, but now a sudden hot stream flowed. She wanted to protest, to say no, to somehow keep him there. But her voice caught, unable to utter a word. A profound, overwhelming emotion swept over her. Darius turned away. He didn't look back at Rachel or Ellie. He only said, his voice almost a whisper, merging with the wind, "I've been that cold before. I know how it feels." He walked away. His steps weren't fast, but they were resolute. He blended into the white expanse of snow, his figure shrinking, then disappearing. In the initial warmth and safety of the temporary shelter, Rachel couldn't stop thinking about Darius. Every time Ellie slept soundly, Rachel would look out the window, as if searching for a familiar figure amidst the snow. A restless ache gnawed at her. He had vanished without a trace, and his absence haunted her. Life at the shelter wasn't easy. Every day was a small battle, vying for a hot shower, lining up for food, finding a quiet corner where Ellie could sleep undisturbed. Rachel had to face curious, sometimes scrutinizing glances from the other residents. She heard stories of kind people being taken advantage of the harshness of the streets. The need for caution had become her second nature, since losing her job and everything else. Some nights, Rachel would wake to hear Darius quietly leaving the shelter, going somewhere alone. She saw him acting mysteriously, often avoiding eye contact as if he were hiding something. Fragments from her own past, when a trusted friend had betrayed her, resurfaced. Rachel, who had once been so optimistic, became easily suspicious after losing everything. She wondered, could Darius's kindness be a disguise or a trade she hadn't yet recognized? This suspicion plunged Rachel into an internal conflict. The guilt of that suspicion gnawed at her even more deeply. Ellie, with her talent for drawing, had sketched a crude but heartfelt picture, a man in a warm coat sitting amidst snowflakes. She taped it to the notice board at the charity centers next to childish writing, "Thank you, snowman. I'm warm now." One afternoon, while Darius was sound asleep, Ellie quietly slipped a peppermint candy into his jacket pocket, a silent thank you. Rachel spent a week going from shelter to shelter, from soup kitchen to soup kitchen, asking around. Most people shook their heads or just looked at her with indifferent eyes. She felt a growing despair. She feared he had simply disappeared, like so many others who vanish from society's view. Rachel blamed herself for her suspicious thoughts. One day, at a community soup kitchen, Fred, an old veteran with white hair and beard, a thin but resilient frame, and eyes dim with age but still sharp and perceptive, sat alone in a corner. He noticed Ellie's drawing. Fred mumbled, pointing at the picture, "This kid. He doesn't ask for food, he asks for blankets, then gives them to others. The only one who never takes, only gives." Fred recounted, his voice hoarse, a glint in his eyes. He had witnessed Darius helping a woman whose wheelchair got stuck in a snowstorm, or quietly placing an old blanket over someone sleeping on a park bench. Fred also revealed that he often passed through the empty lot looking for scraps of food, and Darius was often there. He looked at Rachel, his face serious. "You have to find him. He deserves help." Rachel asked about where he usually went, her voice trembling. Fred, after a moment's thought, pointed east of the city. "That old pickup truck. Usually parked near the empty lot by that abandoned warehouse." With a fragile hope, a newfound belief guiding her, Rachel held Ellie's hand tightly. The two of them took a bus, then walked through snow-covered streets. Ellie began to cough again, a slight fever making her cheeks flush. Rachel grew more worried, clutching her daughter's hand tighter. A deep fear enveloped her. What if she didn't find him in time? Would he be okay? The guilt tore at her fiercely, especially when she thought about her initial doubts. The snowstorm suddenly intensified. Rachel and Ellie were walking on a desolate road leading to the empty lot. Each gust of wind slapped their faces, biting cold. Rachel hugged Ellie tightly, pulling her scarf up to cover her daughter's face. Ellie suddenly stopped, clutching her mother's hand. "Mommy, the snowman is a good person, I know he is." Her voice was clear, resolute, amidst the howling wind. Ellie's eyes looked at Rachel with unwavering conviction. Rachel knelt down to look at her daughter, her doubt faltering. Just then, an ambulance sped by, lights flashing, sirens echoing in the blizzard. Fred, who had helped Rachel, suddenly appeared from a nearby alley, panting as he ran towards them. "Rachel, I just saw Darius. He fell at the empty lot, badly injured. It looked like he was trying to push someone out of the way when a truck skidded on the ice. They just took him to Central General Hospital," Fred said, pointing in the direction the ambulance had disappeared. A wave of intense panic crashed over Rachel. She gasped, her legs freezing. She looked at Ellie, then in the direction the ambulance had vanished. Utter fear choked her heart. All misunderstandings, all trivial suspicions melted away like snow in fire. She regretted it immensely. "I should have looked for him sooner," she thought, her voice cracking. Rachel grabbed Ellie's hand and they both ran through the blizzard. The ambulance siren guided them. Each step was heavy, their bodies trembling from cold and tension. Ellie, despite being weak, still clung tightly to her mother's hand, her small eyes filled with worry. "Snowman, snowman," she repeated like a prayer. Finally, they arrived at the hospital. The hallway was cold, the smell of antiseptic stung their noses. Rachel rushed to the reception desk, her voice trembling. "Urgent, please. There's a man named Darius Cole. He was in an accident, just brought in." The receptionist looked at her with tired eyes. Ellie suddenly tugged at her mother's sleeve. She saw a nurse walking by, holding a file. Tucked into the file was a crude drawing. It was the snowman picture Ellie had drawn, given to the paramedics by Fred for identification. Ellie shouted, pointing, "Mommy, my drawing, the snowman!" The nurse turned, looked at Ellie, then at Rachel. The nurse led them to Darius's room. Rachel rushed into the hospital room. Darius lay there, his face pale, a bandage wrapped around his head. He was still unconscious. The nurse said he had a mild concussion and hypothermia, but was not in life-threatening condition. Rachel bent down, touching his hand. It was cold. Regret tore at her, a physical ache not unlike the bitter cold outside. Ellie stood by his side, tears streaming down her cheeks. Rachel carefully stroked Darius's old, worn jacket, the one that had warmed Ellie. Her trembling hand reached into his pocket. She felt a small, folded piece of paper. She opened it. The handwriting was crude but clear. The words, written in pencil, were faded from dampness. "Don't let anyone get cold like my sister did. Help." Rachel stood frozen, as if she'd been turned to ice. Her eyes read the words over and over. Every last shred of doubt completely vanished, like snow melting under a warm sun. It was genuine kindness, selfless, hiding nothing. Tears streamed down Rachel's face, not from sorrow anymore, but from profound understanding and overwhelming regret. She had doubted such a truly good man. She clutched the paper in her hand, a new strong determination rising within her. She would help Darius, just as he had helped her and Ellie. Darius gradually recovered. He was transferred to the shelter. Fred often visited, bringing hot coffee and small talk. Sarah also checked on Darius regularly, her face beaming when she saw him getting better. She smiled with genuine relief. When Darius was able to walk again, he immediately returned to volunteering at the food pantry. He diligently stacked large boxes, sweat beading on his forehead. He wasn't wearing a uniform, just his old shirt, but his movements showed meticulousness and responsibility. He would hum an old blues song while working, occasionally pausing to jot down inventory numbers in a small notebook to ensure fairness. He found a purpose, a place where he could contribute without needing any recognition. He felt at peace and proud. The regular meals and meaningful work had helped him recover significantly, no longer bearing the haggard look he once had. But the joy didn't last long. One afternoon, an urgent meeting was called. The shelter director, a middle-aged man with a tired face, stood before everyone. His voice was grim. "We're facing severe funding shortages. If we don't find new sponsors within a month, we'll have to close." The news hit like a punch. Whispers rose. Anxious, bewildered looks spread across the room. Rachel froze. This shelter was all she and Ellie had now. It was their first real home after so many days of wandering. Thanks to it, Ellie was eating better, no longer as pale as before. Her hair was shinier, her cheeks rosy again. She looked at Darius, who still stood there, his shoulders slightly slumped, his eyes gazing out the window. A thought flashed through Rachel's mind. Darius, an independent, quiet man, would he just leave again to protect himself? After all he had sacrificed, would he have the strength to bear this additional burden? The old misunderstanding, however weak, crept into her heart. She looked at Darius, waiting for a reaction, a sign. A community meeting took place. City leaders made empty promises, vague figures. The atmosphere was tense. An elderly homeless man stood up, his voice trembling. "So, we'll be back on the streets? Cold again?" Darius, who had always been quiet, suddenly stepped forward. He looked at no one in particular, only directly at the officials. His voice was hoarse, but it resonated. No one should shiver in a city as brightly lit as this. He spoke of the cold nights he had endured, of the fear of having nowhere to go. He spoke of Ellie, of Rachel, of the vulnerable people he had met. His voice held no resentment, just the raw truth of pain and loneliness. Rachel looked at Darius, her heart aching. All doubt completely vanished. He wasn't leaving. He was fighting, not just for himself. "That's an official," his face frowning, interrupted Darius. "We understand, but the budget is limited." Just then, a group of reporters burst in. They had heard about the meeting, about the risk of the shelter closing. Sarah, with her phone in hand, had tipped off a local reporter she knew. She had decided this was the only chance to get public attention. A reporter aimed a microphone at Darius. "Who are you? Do you want to say anything?" Darius didn't answer. He just looked at Rachel, his eyes seeming to say, "Together." Rachel nodded, rushing to stand beside Darius. She began to tell her story, about how Darius had given up his shelter spot for her and Ellie on that blizzard night. Ellie, though small, also firmly held her mother's hand, her large, clear eyes looking directly into the camera. She said, her voice bright, "He's the best person. He's my snowman." This image spread quickly, deeply moving public opinion. Public pressure mounted. Small donations began to pour in. Stories of Darius and Rachel spread across social media. Sarah, the social worker, tirelessly lobbied, organizing fundraisers. Fred and other homeless individuals also participated, telling their stories, affirming the shelter's crucial role. Even some homeless people who had previously gossiped about Darius voluntarily came to apologize to Rachel and then joined in helping the shelter. They not only contributed their efforts but also shared their experiences living on the streets, helping the shelter find more effective ways to provide support. The shelter was saved. Not only that, it received more support than before, with programs to improve facilities and increase staff. Now, the shelter was not just a roof, but a true community. The clatter of dishes, the aroma of hot food wafted through the community kitchen. Rachel now looked healthier, her eyes less shadowed, reflecting resilience and peace as she stood by the stove, deftly chopping vegetables. She wore a white apron, a gentle smile on her lips. She had become a temporary employee there. She listened as another woman spoke of her hardships. Rachel nodded, her eyes understanding. She bent down and placed a hot plate of food on the table. Having a stable job in the kitchen not only gave her income, but also ensured meals for her small family every day. In the food pantry, Darius was quietly stacking large boxes. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He carefully sorted items, unhurried. Though still wearing his old worn shirt, it no longer carried the look of loneliness, but instead conveyed steadiness, reliability. His actions showed meticulousness and responsibility. He found a purpose, a place where he could contribute without needing any recognition. He felt at peace and proud. The regular meals and meaningful work had helped him recover significantly, no longer bearing the haggard look he once had. Small footsteps. Ellie, now looking healthier and more active, her golden hair neatly tied back, her cheeks rosy, entered the pantry. She held a peppermint candy in her hand. Ellie walked straight to Darius. She said nothing, just stood on her tiptoes, quietly placing the peppermint candy into his shirt pocket. Darius looked down, saw the candy. He smiled, a gentle, warm smile. He softly ruffled Ellie's head. That was their daily ritual. Weeks later, life at the shelter gradually settled into a stable rhythm. Rachel, now accustomed to her work in the kitchen, felt a strong urge to do something special for Darius. She secretly contacted Fred and Sarah, telling them her idea. Both enthusiastically supported her. A special evening was arranged. Warm lights glowed in the shelter's communal dining room. Laughter and the rich aroma of food filled the air. Everyone worked together to prepare a special meal. Not the usual portions, but hearty beef stew and warm apple pie, the dishes Rachel knew Darius quietly enjoyed the most. When the meal ended, Rachel stood up. Her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze was steady. She looked directly at Darius, who sat quietly in a corner as always. "Darius," she began, her voice a little shaky, but then gaining strength. "You might not know it, but you gave me and Ellie a chance to start over, to not be cold, to not be hungry anymore." She paused, took a deep breath. "And more than that, you gave us hope. Hope in human kindness, even when everything seemed to have fallen apart." Ellie, with rosy cheeks and shiny golden hair, walked to Darius, holding a light blue scarf. It was the scarf she had knitted herself with Rachel's help, each stitch clumsy but full of affection. Ellie stood on her tiptoes, carefully draping the warm scarf around Darius's neck. "Now you won't be cold anymore," she said, her voice clear, her eyes full of tenderness. Darius, who was usually quiet and rarely showed emotion, looked down at the scarf, then at Ellie. A gentle, rare but genuine smile bloomed on his lips. He nodded slightly, his eyes showing a profound emotion Rachel had never seen before. He raised his hand, gently touched the soft scarf, then lightly ruffled Ellie's head. That was all he needed to say. That evening, laughter and warm stories lingered. The light from the small lamps in the communal dining room of the shelter now symbolized not just hope and connection, but also the light of gratitude and human kindness given and received. Months later, the lives of Darius, Rachel, and Ellie had changed, not by a sudden miracle or new wealth, but by perseverance and kindness. Minneapolis was still a harsh city, but now they weren't alone. Rachel continued her work at the kitchen, gradually becoming an indispensable part of the team. She was no longer just a recipient of help, but someone who extended a hand. She learned to listen to stories, to see the hidden pain in others' eyes, and to share her own experiences to offer a bit more hope. Ellie attended kindergarten nearby, returning each day with new drawings and babbling stories about her friends. She still often stopped by the food pantry to check on her snowman. Darius remained at his job in the pantry. He was still quiet, a man of few words, but his presence was a solid anchor. He no longer had to sleep in his old pickup truck. Thanks to Sarah's help and the shelter's fund, he found a small, warm, and private room nearby. His life now had a stability he hadn't dared to dream of before. Occasionally, Rachel and Darius would meet during their lunch break. They sat at a small table, sharing a hot cup of coffee. They didn't talk much, just exchanged glances, subtle nods, enough to understand that they were still there for each other. They were now an indispensable part of each other's lives, like a family not bound by blood. One afternoon, Rachel and Darius shared their story with new shelter residents about how they had found hope and strength from the smallest actions, inspiring others who were in despair. A new, somewhat bewildered volunteer looked at Darius quietly working in the pantry and asked Ellie, who was helping Rachel wipe down tables, "Who is that man?" Ellie looked towards Darius, who was smiling kindly at another colleague. She smiled brightly, her voice clear but full of conviction. "He's the one who didn't leave. When I was cold, he stayed. That's all." The image of Ellie and Darius, two individuals who had once been alone, now finding each other in shared compassion. Snow still fell outside the window, the crunch of footsteps echoing, but inside, the warmth of human kindness and the hope for a brighter tomorrow were slowly spreading. Life still held many difficulties, but they knew they had each other, and that was all they needed to keep going, with a newfound hope. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.